The pen felt heavier than it should have. Not because it was expensive or metal or engraved with my name, but because I knew that once it touched the paper, there would be no going back. Across the desk, the lawyer sat perfectly still, her hands folded, her expression calm in that practiced way people have when they already know the outcome, but still need your consent to make it real. The office smelled faintly of paper and coffee. Somewhere behind me, a clock ticked, slow, deliberate, almost accusatory. My phone vibrated again. I didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. My son had called 23 times in the last 2 days, left messages, sent texts, apologies mixed with demands, love tangled with entitlement. I hadn't answered a single one. "Mrs. Reynolds," the lawyer said quietly, sliding the documents closer to me, "I need to ask you one last time. Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed?" I stared down at the pages, legal language, signatures, finality. Certain. I nodded. The pen scratched across the paper, slow at first, then steadier. My hand didn't shake. I was surprised by that. I'd imagined this moment 1,000 times, imagined myself crying, hesitating, breaking down. None of that happened. By the time I finished signing the last page, something inside me had gone very still, very clear. "There's one more thing," I said, placing the pen down. My voice sounded calm, almost distant. "I need to make a phone call." The lawyer hesitated, then pushed the desk phone toward me. I dialed the number I knew by heart. It rang once, twice. He answered on the third ring. "Mom?" His voice was strained, hopeful, desperate all at once. "Thank God. I've been trying to reach you. We need to talk." I looked at the signed documents spread across the desk, at the envelope waiting to be sealed, at the future I had just locked into place. "Listen carefully," I said. "I'm only going to say this once." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. 4 words left my mouth. 4 words that made the lawyer's eyes widen. 4 words that made my son go completely silent. But you don't get to hear them yet, not until you understand what he did to me, not until you know why his own wedding was the moment everything between us broke, and not until you see how easily love turns into entitlement when the person you sacrificed everything for decides you're disposable. 3 weeks earlier, I was standing in the middle of a wedding reception I had helped pay for, holding a champagne glass I didn't remember asking for. The venue was beautiful. Too beautiful, if I'm honest. White roses climbed up tall gold stands. Soft music floated through the air, the kind chosen to sound elegance without anyone actually listening to it. Crystal glasses clinked. People laughed. Everywhere I looked, there were small, expensive details meant to signal happiness and success. My son's wedding. I had arrived 4 hours early that morning after driving nearly 300 miles alone. I wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything. I wanted to help if help was needed. I wanted to be present, not just physically, but in the way a mother is present on a day like this. I wore the navy blue dress his fiancé had approved weeks earlier. Formal, conservative, classy, she'd said. It had cost more than I was comfortable spending, but I told myself it didn't matter. This day wasn't about me. I stood near the edge of the reception hall, smiling when people made eye contact, nodding politely when distant relatives I barely recognized congratulated me. Someone told me how handsome my son looked. Someone else said I must be so proud. I was. I watched him from across the room, my only child, adjusting his cufflinks, laughing with his groomsmen, his tie slightly crooked the way it always got when he was excited. For a moment, I thought about his father, how proud he would have been, how he would have told embarrassing stories and danced badly and cried openly without caring who saw. I didn't know that in less than 10 minutes, my son would ask me to leave. It happened quickly, too quickly for my mind to catch up. I was standing near the dessert table, pretending not to notice how much my feet hurt in those shoes, when I felt someone step close to me. I turned, already smiling. Mom? My son stood there, jaw tight, eyes not quite meeting mine. I recognized that look immediately. I'd seen it when he was 7 and determined to do something dangerous, when he was 16 and announcing a decision he'd already made. It was a look that said this conversation wasn't up for discussion. The ceremony was beautiful, I said, reaching out slightly. She looked absolutely. You need to leave. For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. The music was loud, the room was full. Someone nearby burst into laughter, and glasses clinked behind us. What? I asked. You need to leave, he repeated, quieter this time, but firmer. He still wasn't looking at me. His gaze was fixed somewhere over my shoulder, as if he were speaking to an inconvenience rather than his mother. I laughed softly, confused. I just got here. He exhaled sharply, irritated. Just go, Mom. Please, don't make this difficult. Difficult. The word echoed in my head. I had raised him alone after his father died, worked extra shifts, missed vacations, missed sleep, missed parts of my own life so he could have more of his. I drove 4 hours that morning just to watch him get married. And now I was being difficult? I drove all this way to be here, I said quietly. This is your wedding. And it's Bridget's day, he snapped. She's already stressed. I don't want her upset. Her day. I followed his gaze toward the head table. Bridget sat there in white lace, holding a champagne flute delicately in one hand. She was watching us. When our eyes met, she smiled. It was small, tight, controlled. Not a welcoming smile, a satisfied one. She's waiting for you to leave, my son said. Please, just go. I felt something inside me break. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a clean, quiet fracture. Are you sure? I asked him. Are you absolutely sure this is what you want? Yes, he said immediately, no pause, no hesitation. We'll talk later. Later. Always later. Later about holidays, later about phone calls that never came. Later about the way I seemed to matter less and less as his life filled up with someone else. I set my champagne glass down on the dessert table. The base made a soft clink against the linen. A server nearby glanced over, then quickly looked away when she saw my face. I didn't hug my son. I didn't touch him at all. I turned and walked through the reception hall with my head held high, my purse clutched tightly under my arm. Every step felt unreal, like I was watching someone else's life from a distance. The music seemed louder, the laughter sharper. Every face I passed felt like judgment, even though no one knew what had just happened. The mother of the groom leaving her son's wedding early. I pushed through the double doors into the afternoon heat. Sunlight flooded the parking lot, bright and unforgiving. My car was parked far from the entrance, alone in the corner where I'd left it hours earlier. As I walked toward it, my heels clicking against the asphalt, I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but they didn't fall. I wouldn't let them. Not there, not where anyone could see. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment before starting the engine. The air conditioner blasted hot air at first, then slowly cooled. Through the rearview mirror, I could see the venue behind me, beautiful, full, alive. Inside, my son was dancing, and I was driving away alone, holding a card in my purse with a check I had planned to give him later that evening. I didn't turn the radio on. I drove in silence for 4 hours. I drove home in complete silence. No music, no podcasts, no comforting voices filling the space, just the steady hum of tires against asphalt and the occasional whoosh of a car passing me on the highway. The sun moved slowly across the sky, then dipped low behind the hills, and by the time I crossed the state line, it was already dark. I stopped once for gas, paid at the pump, used the restroom, bought a bottle of water I didn't drink. The cashier barely looked up from her phone. To her, I was just another woman passing through.
She didn't know I'd just been erased from my son's most important day. When I finally pulled into my driveway close to midnight, the porch light was still on. I had left it on that morning, thinking I'd be back late but happy, thinking I'd return tired from dancing, from laughing, from being included. The house was quiet, too quiet. I sat in the car for a long time, keys still in the ignition, staring at the front door. This house had been my entire adult life. Every sacrifice I'd ever made lived inside those walls. And yet, standing there alone, I felt like a guest in my own story. I went inside and didn't turn on any lights. I set my purse on the kitchen counter and noticed the envelope sticking out, the wedding card. Inside was a check for $8,000. $8,000 I had saved over the last year by working extra shifts, taking nights I didn't want, weekends when my body begged me to rest. I had planned to give it to my son quietly, privately, maybe during the reception when we could hug and talk without an audience. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at that check for a long time. I thought about the choices that led me here. After my husband died, everything changed overnight. He was 46 when his heart failed him. One moment we were talking about repainting the living room. The next, I was standing in a hospital hallway signing papers I barely understood. Our son was 12. From that day on, there was no backup plan, no shared responsibility, no one else to catch things when they fell. It was just me. I went back to work sooner than I should have because bills don't pause for grief. I took extra shifts at the hospital because braces and school trips and groceries didn't pay for themselves. I learned how to fix things around the house because calling someone cost money I didn't have. I refinanced the mortgage twice to keep him in the same school district when moving would have been easier. I missed birthdays with friends. I missed holidays I couldn't afford to travel for. I told myself I'd rest later. I told myself this was temporary. I told myself it was worth it. When he wanted piano lessons, I found a way. When he wanted to go to college we couldn't quite afford, I signed loan papers with a knot in my stomach and told him we'd figure it out. When he called me at 2 in the morning during his first year away at school, homesick and overwhelmed, I stayed on the phone until his breathing slowed. I never reminded him of what it cost me. I didn't want gratitude. I wanted him to have a life bigger than mine. Somewhere along the way, that became expected. When he introduced me to Bridget, I tried. I really did. I gave her space, bit my tongue when she moved into our guest room temporarily, and stayed for 6 months without contributing to groceries or utilities, smiled politely when she made comments about how old-fashioned my house felt, said nothing when wedding plans ballooned from modest to extravagant. When they asked if I could help with wedding expenses, I said yes without asking for details. I didn't want to be the mother who complained. I didn't want to be difficult. So I worked more. I slept less. I told myself that love was quiet and invisible, and that if I just stayed out of the way, everything would be fine. That night after the wedding, I didn't cry. I couldn't. My body felt too tired for that kind of release. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table until the sky outside the window began to lighten. At dawn, I went out to the backyard and started pulling weeds. Dirt packed under my fingernails. My back ached. Sweat gathered at the base of my neck, even in the cool morning air. The physical pain was almost comforting. It was something I understood. Around 8:30, my phone rang. I wiped my hands on my jeans and looked at the screen. My son. For a brief, foolish moment, I thought he might be calling to apologize, to say he'd made a mistake, to tell me he was ashamed of what he'd done. I answered. "Hey, Mom," he said brightly, as if we'd spoken the day before about nothing more serious than groceries. "Quick question." My stomach tightened. "The property papers?" I repeated. "Yeah," he said, "for the land. Bridget and I were talking, and her uncle knows a developer. We think it could be really profitable if we move fast. Move fast. I looked out over my backyard, the fence I'd repaired myself last spring, the trees my husband had planted when our son was still in diapers, the house I'd kept standing through sheer stubbornness and necessity. We'd obviously split the profits with you, he continued, but since we'd be doing all the work, probably 60-40. It's smart planning, Mom. You don't really need all that space anymore. There it was. Not even 24 hours after throwing me out of his wedding, not even a single apology, just a demand, as if everything I was and everything I'd ever given had been reduced to a resource, waiting to be liquidated. I closed my eyes and listened to him talk about timelines and paperwork and how inconvenient it would be if I delayed. And for the first time in years, I understood something with absolute clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was entitlement. He talked like this was a favor, like he was doing me a kindness by looping me into his plans instead of simply taking what he wanted. He spoke quickly, confidently, the way he always did when he believed he'd already won. Bridget's uncle has experience with this kind of thing, he said. He's flipped properties before. He says the market is perfect right now. If we wait, we'll lose momentum. Momentum. I pressed my palm into the dirt and slowly stood up. My knees cracked. The garden smelled like earth and leaves and the faint sweetness of flowers I'd planted years ago with my husband. I brushed soil from my hands and walked toward the back porch, the phone still pressed to my ear. You want me to send you the deed, I said carefully. Not the deed exactly, he replied, already correcting me. Just the property documents for now, so we can get things started. You'll still be involved, obviously. Obviously. I was kicked out of your wedding yesterday, I said. There was a pause. Not guilt, not reflection. Annoyance. I told you, he said. Bridget was stressed. It wasn't personal. It wasn't personal. He said it the way someone dismisses a minor inconvenience, like spilled wine, like traffic, like I was collateral damage in a situation that mattered more than my dignity. And today, I continued, you're asking me to hand over my property. It's not like that, he said quickly. You're making it sound dramatic. Dramatic. I leaned against the porch railing and watched a bird hop along the fence line. The world looked exactly the same as it had 24 hours earlier. Nothing had shifted except the way I saw my son. Bridget's uncle thinks this would be good for you, he added. Of course she did. She found a really nice senior community about 20 minutes from us, he went on, warming to the idea. Smaller place, easier to manage. They have activities, a pool, people your age. People your age. I'm 58, I said. Yeah, he replied lightly, but eventually. Eventually. The word hung in the air between us, heavy and insulting. Eventually, I would be old enough to be moved aside. Eventually, I would be inconvenient. Eventually, I would need less, deserve less, take up less space. And the land? I asked. Oh, that's the best part, he said, enthusiasm creeping into his voice. We could subdivide it, build a few houses, maybe 6 or 7. Bridget's uncle already talked to some investors. We could make a fortune. A fortune. I thought about my husband's hands, rough from fixing fences and repairing old boards. About the way he used to walk the perimeter of the property every spring, checking posts and gates like it was a ritual. About the promises we made to each other, about keeping what we'd built intact. And you want the papers today? I asked. If possible, tomorrow at the latest. They're meeting Thursday. Thursday. 3 days. 3 days to hand over everything my life was built on. Bridget's uncle needs to see the documents. He won't move forward without them. I could hear her in the background then. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp, controlled. The same tone she used when she smiled at me from the head table. Is she being difficult? Bridget asked. He didn't cover the phone. Yeah, he said quietly. A little. Difficult. The word again. I felt something inside me harden, not into anger, but into something colder,
something steadier. "Tell her I can hear her," I said. Silence. "She didn't mean it like that," he said quickly. "She's just stressed." "She was stressed yesterday, too," I replied. "That was different." "Different how?" "She just wants what's best for our future, our family." Not me. Not the people who came before. Just them. "Let me ask you something," I said. "Why now?" "What do you mean?" "Why the rush?" I pressed. "You've never mentioned developing the land before." Another pause. Longer this time. "Well," he said slowly, "it just makes sense. You're alone out there. It's a lot to manage. And honestly, Mom, it's just sitting there. Just sitting there. Like decades of work and memory and care were nothing more than wasted potential. I'm supposed to think about my future," he added. "That's what responsible adults do." "And my future?" I asked. "We are thinking about your future. This way you'd have money set aside. You wouldn't have to worry." Worry. I thought about the nights I'd lain awake calculating bills, the years I'd worried silently so he wouldn't have to, the future I'd already survived without his help. "You'll send the papers today?" he asked. I didn't answer. "Mom?" His voice sharpened. "This is time sensitive." "I need time to think," I replied. He exhaled loudly. "There's nothing to think about." "There is for me," I replied. "You're being stubborn," he snapped. "This is exactly what Bridget was talking about." There it was again, her name again, her voice again, shaping the narrative. "You're letting emotions cloud your judgment. This is business." Business. My husband's death was business to the hospital. My grief was business to the bank. And now my son wanted my home to be business too. "I'll call you back," I said. "When?" His impatience bled through the line. "We need an answer today." "I said I'll call you back." He didn't like that. "Don't drag this out," he warned. "You're making things harder than they need to be." Harder. For who? The call ended abruptly, not with goodbye, just a click. My phone buzzed again almost immediately. A text. "We really need those papers, Mom. Please don't make this difficult." Another. "Bridget's uncle won't wait." Another. "I can't believe you're doing this to me." I stared at the screen, feeling a strange calm settle over me. The pattern was unmistakable now. Demand, pressure, guilt. And not once did he acknowledge what he'd done the day before. I turned my phone face down and went inside. I made myself lunch, ate slowly, washed the dishes. Outside, the afternoon sun moved across the yard like it always had. The world didn't rush me. Only my son did. And that's when I understood something important. He didn't see me as his mother anymore. He saw me as an obstacle. By the next morning, my phone felt like a weapon. It rang while I was making coffee, again while I was brushing my teeth, again while I was standing in the shower, steam filling the bathroom, the sound of the ringtone echoing off tile like something urgent and unavoidable. I didn't answer. By noon, the calls turned into messages. "Mom, this is ridiculous. Why are you making such a big deal out of this? You're acting like we did something wrong." I read them without responding. I had learned over the years that silence made people like my son uncomfortable. He needed engagement, resistance, something to push against. When he didn't get it, his tone changed. "Please call me. We just want to talk this through. Bridget's really upset." Bridget. Always Bridget. That afternoon, he left a voicemail. I listened to it while folding laundry. "Mom," he said, his voice tight, rehearsed. "I don't know what's going on with you, but this is starting to feel unfair. We're family. Families don't treat each other like this." Unfair. I paused, one of his old t-shirts still folded in my hands. The same shirts I'd washed 1,000 times when he was younger, the same clothes I'd packed carefully when he left for college. Families don't treat each other like this. He was right, but not in the way he meant. The next voicemail came an hour later. "You're overreacting," he said. "Yesterday wasn't that serious. Bridget was stressed. You always take things so personally." Always, as if this were a pattern of mine. as if I had imagined being thrown out of his wedding. By evening, the guilt arrived. "Mom," he said in the next message, his voice softer now, wounded. "I don't understand why you're doing this. After everything I've done to make you proud, after everything we've been through, don't I deserve some trust?" Trust. The word landed heavily in my chest. I had trusted him with my life, with my finances, with my heart. The messages continued. "You're being selfish. You're thinking only about yourself. You're punishing me because you're hurt." That one made me laugh out loud. Punishing him, as if refusing to hand over my home was an act of cruelty. I went to bed early that night, but sleep didn't come. I lay awake listening to the house settle around me, the familiar creaks and groans of old wood adjusting to the night air. This house had held me together through grief and exhaustion and loneliness, and now my son wanted it dismantled. The next morning, Karen called. Her name flashed across the screen, and for a moment I considered letting it ring. Instead, I answered. "Karen," she said brightly, too brightly. "Hi, it's Bridget." She'd never called me by my first name before. It felt intentional, a reminder of distance. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Dominic is really upset. We both are. We just want to have a calm, rational conversation like adults." Adults. The same woman who had smiled when my son asked me to leave his wedding wanted to talk about rationality. "I'm listening." She launched into it smoothly. How they loved me, how they wanted what was best for everyone, how the land was too much responsibility for someone my age, how this opportunity could secure my future. "You could finally relax, enjoy your retirement. Don't you deserve that?" Deserve. I wondered when she had decided that my life needed simplifying, when she decided I was something to be managed. "This isn't about the wedding," she added quickly. "That's in the past. We're talking about moving forward." Moving forward meant pretending nothing had happened. "You humiliated me," I said. She sighed, the sound carefully measured. "Karen, no one humiliated you. You chose to take things the wrong way." There it was, gaslighting wrapped in concern. "We just think you're letting emotions cloud your judgment. Dominic is under a lot of pressure. You should be supporting him right now, not creating obstacles." Obstacles. I thanked her for calling and ended the conversation. The voicemails that followed were angrier. "You're tearing this family apart," my son said in one. "This is my inheritance," he snapped in another. "Dad would be ashamed of you," he said in a third. That one hurt. It hurt more than I expected, more than I wanted to admit. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the phone until the screen went dark. By the fourth day, the threats began. "I'll contest it," he said in a message. "You don't understand the legal implications. This could get ugly." Ugly. I thought about the way he'd looked at me at the wedding, the way his voice hadn't wavered when he told me to leave. This was not confusion. This was entitlement meeting resistance. I didn't reply. I went about my days slowly, deliberately. I watered the garden, walked the perimeter of the property, ran my hands along the fence posts my husband had repaired so many times. Each physical act grounded me in something real. On the fifth night, I listened to one last voicemail before deleting it. "Mom," my son said, his voice breaking now, "please, I'm begging you. I don't know why you're doing this, but you're all I have left. All I have left." I thought about the years I had been all he had, and how easily that had been forgotten. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the lights off, the glow from the street lamp filtering through the curtains. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I didn't pray for guidance. I simply listened. Listened to the silence that followed when I finally turned my phone off. And in that silence, something settled inside me. A decision was forming, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of clarity. The morning after I turned my phone off, I woke before sunrise. The house was still dark, the air cool and heavy with that quiet only early mornings bring. For a long moment, I lay there, listening to my own breathing, half expecting the familiar buzz of my phone to break the silence. It didn't. I got out of bed slowly, my joints stiff, my body reminding me of every extra shift and sleepless night I'd put it through over the years. I padded into the kitchen, filled the kettle, and stood by the window while the water heated, watching the sky begin to lighten at the edges. For the first time in days, my chest didn't feel tight. I didn't check my phone. I didn't replay conversations in my head. I didn't imagine what I would say if he called again. Instead, I made tea and sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around the mug, letting the warmth seep into my fingers. I thought about my husband, about the way he used to stand on this very porch, coffee in hand, surveying the land like it was something alive that needed tending. He never spoke about ownership the way my son did. To him, the property wasn't an asset, it was a responsibility. Take care of it, he used to say, and it'll take care of us. When he was dying, his voice weak and uneven, he made me promise something. He gripped my hand with surprising strength and said it again and again, like he was afraid the words might slip away if he didn't anchor them firmly. Don't let anyone break this apart, he said, not even him. At the time, I'd brushed it off. Our son was young, kind, grieving. I couldn't imagine a future where that promise would be tested. But here it was. After breakfast, I put on my shoes and walked the property line the way my husband used to. The grass was damp with dew. Birds flitted between trees, unconcerned with family drama or legal documents. I touched the fence posts, counted the steps between landmarks I knew by heart. This land had seen generations come and go. It would outlast all of us. By mid-morning, I was sitting at my desk with a yellow legal pad in front of me. I wrote down facts, not feelings. What I owned, what was protected, what could be taken, what couldn't. I didn't write my son's name, I wrote mine. Just before noon, I drove into town. The lawyer's office was above a hardware store on Main Street, the same place I'd gone years earlier when my husband passed and the world felt just as unstable. The stairs creaked beneath my feet as I climbed them, my heartbeat steady but deliberate. Patricia looked up when I walked in. "Karen," she said, standing, "I wasn't expecting you." "I need to talk," I replied. She didn't ask questions. She gestured for me to sit. I told her everything. The wedding, the phone calls, the demands, the pressure, the way my son spoke about my life like it was already over. She listened without interrupting, her pen moving occasionally across a notepad. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and folded her hands. "What do you want to do?" she asked. The question landed heavily, but I didn't hesitate. "I want to protect what's mine, permanently." She nodded slowly. "There are ways to do that." She explained my options carefully: legal terms, protections, permanence. She didn't frame it as revenge. She framed it as control, ownership, boundaries. "If you proceed," she said, "there's no undoing it." I looked out the window, at Main Street below, at people going about their lives unaware that mine was pivoting in a quiet office above a hardware store. "That's what I want," I said. We went over details, documents, safeguards, timelines. She didn't rush me. By the time I left her office, the sun was high, and the world felt strangely unchanged. Cars passed, people laughed. Somewhere, someone was planning dinner. I drove home slowly. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel sad. I felt resolved. That evening, I turned my phone back on. The screen lit up immediately, missed calls, messages, voicemails. I didn't listen to them.
I set the phone face down on the table and poured myself another cup of tea. Outside, the sun dipped behind the trees, painting the sky in soft oranges and purples. Tomorrow, I would sign papers. Tomorrow, the situation would change. But tonight, I sat in the quiet I had chosen, and for the first time since the wedding, I slept through the night.
The documents were thicker than I expected. Dozens of pages, heavy with legal language and finality, stacked neatly on the lawyer's desk. Patricia walked me through each section carefully, her voice steady, professional, making sure I understood exactly what I was agreeing to. "Once this is signed," she said, tapping the page gently, "there is no reversal. The decision is permanent." "I understand," I replied. She studied my face for a moment as if looking for doubt. She didn't find any. She slid the pen toward me. It was heavier than the one I'd used before, the kind of pen meant for important decisions. I signed my name on the first page, then the second, then the third. Each signature felt less like an ending and more like a boundary finally being drawn. By the time I finished, my hand was steady. Patricia gathered the papers and placed them carefully into a folder. "I'll file everything this afternoon," she said. "Once it's processed, there's nothing anyone can do to change it." My phone buzzed inside my purse. Patricia glanced at it, then back at me. "Do you need to take that?" "Yes," I said. "I think I do." I pulled the phone out and saw my son's name on the screen. He'd been calling non-stop again. I answered and put it on speaker. "Mom," he said immediately, relief flooding his voice. "Finally, we need to talk." "I'm listening," I replied. "We've been trying to reach you all morning," he said. "This can't wait. Bridget's uncle is getting frustrated, and honestly, so am I." I looked at the folder on the desk, at the signatures, at the quiet certainty of what I'd done. "Before you say anything else," I said, "listen carefully." There was a pause. "I'm only going to say this once." "Okay," he said, cautious now. "Go ahead." "The property isn't yours anymore." Silence. Not the kind filled with breathing or background noise, the kind that drops like a curtain. "What?" he finally asked. "It's not yours," I repeated, "and it never will be." "You don't make sense," he said, his voice rising. "What do you mean it's not mine? That's my inheritance." "It was my property," I replied calmly, "and I've already made my decision." I could hear movement on his end, a muffled voice. "Bridget." "What did she say?" she asked sharply. "She says it's not mine," he replied, panic creeping in. "Mom, what did you do?" "I protected it. Permanently." "You can't just do that," he snapped. "I'll contest it. I'll take you to court." "You won't," I said. "How do you know?" "Because the property no longer belongs to me either. It's been placed under legal protection. It can't be sold, developed, or transferred. Ever." His breathing grew fast and shallow. "You went behind my back," he said. "No," I corrected. "I acted on my own behalf." "This is insane," he shouted. "You're choosing dirt over your own son." I waited a moment before responding. "You kicked me out of your wedding. You humiliated me in front of everyone you know, and the very next morning, you demanded I hand over my life's work so you could profit from it." "That was business," he argued. "You're being emotional." "No," I said. "This is the most clear-headed decision I've made in years." "You can't do this," he said again, desperation cracking through his anger. "I'm your son." "You were," I replied softly, "until you decided I was disposable." There was shouting in the background now, Bridget's voice, sharp and angry, cutting in out. "You said this wouldn't happen," she hissed. "I didn't know she'd—" "I'm done," I said. "There's nothing left to discuss." "Mom, wait!" I ended the call. I set the phone down on Patricia's desk and turned it face down. The silence in the room was immediate and absolute. Patricia looked at me carefully. "Are you okay?" I took a slow breath. "Yes," I said.
And for the first time, I knew it was true. I stood up, thanked her, and walked out of the office without looking back. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright. The street was busy. Life moved forward the same way it always had. But something fundamental had shifted. For years, I had given without limits, explained without being asked, justified myself to keep the peace. And in doing so, I had taught my son that access to me was unconditional, even when respect was not. That lesson was over. The calls didn't stop right away. That first night, my phone buzzed repeatedly on the kitchen counter, the screen lighting up every few minutes with his name, with Bridget's, with numbers I didn't recognize. I didn't answer any of them. I turned the phone off and let the house settle around me. Outside, the wind moved through the trees the way it always had, indifferent to family disputes and broken expectations. I made dinner, cleaned the kitchen, and went to bed without the familiar knot in my stomach that had lived there for years. In the days that followed, the messages changed. At first, they were angry. "You can't do this. You're ruining everything. We'll fight this." Then they turned desperate. "Please call me. We can work something out. I didn't mean what I said." And finally, they went quiet. A week passed without a single message. I learned later, through Patricia, that Bridget had left. When the money vanished, so did her patience. The plans, the timelines, the investors, all of it collapsed without the property she'd counted on. My son tried to contest the decision. His lawyer sent a letter full of confident language and thin threats. Patricia responded once, firmly. After that, there was nothing more to say. Time did what time always does. It created distance. Months went by, summer faded into autumn, leaves gathered along the fence line, and I raked them slowly, deliberately, without rushing. I planted new bulbs for spring, repaired a section of the barn roof that had been leaking, small, tangible acts that reminded me I was still capable, still present, still in control of my life. I didn't hear from my son for a long time. When I finally did, it wasn't a call, it was a letter. 3 pages, handwritten. His words were smaller than I remembered, cramped and uneven, as if written in a hurry. He apologized, not with excuses, but with acknowledgement. He wrote about the wedding, about the way he treated me, about the pressure he'd let himself fall under, and the mistakes he'd made trying to impress the wrong person. He said he understood now. He said losing everything had forced him to see what he'd taken for granted. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. I didn't respond, not because I wanted to punish him, but because some lessons need time to settle. The property remained untouched, protected, quiet, exactly the way it was meant to be. I walked it most mornings, breathing in air that smelled like pine and earth and permanence. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. For the first time in years, my life felt like my own again. For a long time, I believed that love meant endurance, that if I just gave enough, stayed quiet enough, sacrificed deeply enough, everything would eventually work itself out. I believed that being a good mother meant putting myself last, even when it cost me my dignity. But sitting in that lawyer's office, pen in hand, I finally understood something I wish I'd learned sooner. Real love isn't proven by how much we're willing to lose. It's proven by whether the people we give to respect what they're given. Somewhere along the way, my son stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a resource. Not because he was evil, but because I had never shown him where the boundary was. I taught him that my limits didn't matter. When I finally drew one, he called it cruelty. But boundaries aren't punishment, they're clarity. They're what remain when love is tested by entitlement and found wanting. Protecting my home wasn't about choosing land over my child. It was about choosing dignity over erasure, about honoring the people who came before me and the life I still have ahead of me.
Some of you listening know exactly what this feels like. You've given years, energy, money, love, and when you finally asked for respect, you were told you were selfish, difficult, too much. If that's you, let me say this gently. You're not wrong for protecting what matters to you. You're not cruel for saying no, and you're not finished just because someone else decided you were inconvenient. Before you go, I want to ask you something. If you were in my place, standing in that moment, faced with a choice between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity, what would you have done? Would you have protected what was yours? Or would you have given in, hoping things might change? I read every comment, and your stories matter more than you think. If this story spoke to you, don't stop here. There's another one waiting for you on your screen right now. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about resilience, boundaries, and the quiet strength it takes to choose yourself, make sure you're subscribed. I'll see you in the next one.